Thank you all for joining us for the How to Use Your Committee Members and Advisor for Feedback workshop. Joining us today are Dr. James Navalta, Associate Professor and Graduate Coordinator for the Department of Kinesiology and Nutrition Sciences, and Dr. Rafael Oganesian, Program Manager for the Office of Undergraduate Research and also a recent graduate. So they will be answering your questions about how to use your committee and advisor for feedback. So I'm going to hand it over to them for introductions, and then we can begin taking questions. So Dr. Navalta, would you like to start us off?
Sure thing. Hi, everybody. I am also a graduate, not a recent one. I graduated from UNLV in 1998 with my master's. So yeah, we're kind of in the same boat here. But I had the good fortune to come back as a faculty member here. I think I am in my 9th year now in the kinesiology department. And I don't know what else as far as introduction goes. Yeah, happy to be here.
Good afternoon, everyone, again. My name is Rafael Oganesian. I am, a 4-year graduate from UNLV. I did all my undergrad and grad studies here, a pair of bachelor degrees in economics and political science, and then pursued my graduate work in political science with a master's in 2014 and a PhD in 2019. I also served in student government for, I think, 4 or 5 of those years. And just looking forward to providing some substantive feedback.
Thank you both. So to get us started with some basics, can you both touch on what is the role of committee members and advisors and the student when it comes to feedback? And maybe specifically touch on the role of chair or co-chairs and separated from committee members.
All right, I will jump in here. So you're going to be working most directly with your chair. So that's the person that is going to give you the greatest amount of feedback, and probably feedback that's occurring most often. Your other committee members, it kind of depends on what their role is. And I think you're not going to be getting feedback from them as often. Usually, at least the way that it works in our department is you work directly with your chair on your document. And then once you and your chair feel that the document is good, then you send it out to the rest of the committee members. So there's a certain amount of editing and whatnot that you'll do directly with your chair before it even hits some of the other members.
So to parallel what Dr. Navalta said, yeah, your chair is your go-to person, right? The other members of the committee, the so-called readers of the committee, usually do not see the writing or the manuscript until it's been signed out by the chair, until it's done. Any issues that you have has to go to the chair first, right? Think of the chair as your best friend. Once you hit that dissertation period, the dissertation writing period. With regard to co-chairs, I elected to have co-chairs, and that was because the topic that I was writing on, unfortunately, our department did not have, I guess, an expert in that specific narrow field. And having befriended numerous experts in the field, after talking with my chair and getting his approval, I chose to bring in co-chairs. So it's really an option that you have, but just keep in mind sort of the veto player theory. The more members in a committee, the more each one member has a veto over your paper.
Thank you both. So in your experience, both as students or maybe as mentors as well, what is the best way for graduate students to handle if an advisor or a committee member is not fulfilling their roles or responsibilities when it comes to providing feedback?
I can start on that. Um, Again, the proper role is bring it up with the chair, right? Especially if the chair and the committee member in question are in the same department, right? Maybe they're going to have that professional relationship that they can then, bring this up with them. My suggestion would be bring it up with the chair first before you directly reach out to them and, give them your concerns. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely run it by your chair, share your concerns with your chair. Your chair might have some background into the person that might help you with some context for sure. So yeah, I would definitely say run it through your chair, and maybe even they're the ones that reaches out to that person and talks to them and approaches the subject a little bit.
Thank you. So kind of still on this subject, how would you suggest approaching the discussion of removing someone from your committee if it just no longer feels appropriate or is a fit, or you were not able to resolve whatever challenges there were?
Yeah, this is a hard one, but I think surprisingly it happens fairly often. You don't really know that maybe somebody is not going to be that great of a fit until you get going into your research or until you start really kind of working with them. So on the one side, I don't think that they would be offended or anything like that. Actually, they'd probably be grateful because if you're anything like us, we're on a lot of committees, and I would be happy to step off of one. So I think it would be fine, especially if it's not really a good fit. And I think the faculty member would recognize that for sure and be open to it.
Yeah, I would also note that in this instance, if the faculty member is not a fit in that specific subdiscipline that you're in, they would take the initiative and recognize that. And in fact, they may even recommend someone else on their behalf. I read that question as also meaning, no longer feels appropriate, right? Um, in the rare instance that you're realizing that a person is not providing any substantive feedback or maybe even be delaying this process, how do you go about, kindly asking this person to, I guess, leave? And again, my go-to move would again be talk with your chair. Make sure that communication line is always open with your chair, especially in today's COVID, I guess, remote setting. Make sure you're always communicating with them on a periodical basis, as you should be when you're making progress on your dissertation or thesis.
Thank you. So our next question here is, if I would like to review feedback in person, or in this case, maybe just a one-on-one WebEx meeting or Zoom, because English might be my second language. Is this a realistic thing to ask, or is it common, or is it more common to go back and forth via email?
I would say that's normal. English was not my first language; it's my third language. And even to this day, there's some writing issues that I have, mainly because I'm not a native English speaker. The one thing I would say is obviously the feedback in person relates to the feedback you get from your chair. I'm assuming this is the question. The implication is the chair here. One thing I would suggest is you find out the schedule of your chair in advance, right? The last thing you want to do is reach out to them 1 week in advance saying, hey, let's meet. This is especially true if your chair happens to be the chair of the department. And the reason I say this is because this was my case, and I reached out to my chair, I believe in February or January, when he had to do evaluations of the whole department, right? Faculty evaluations. And it turned out to be a good month before we met, and that was my mistake because, I should have reached out to that person way advanced saying, hey, what is your schedule? What is this time, in the next couple of months? So please give your chair plenty of time to reach out to them. And in fact, it is very realistic to have one-on-one WebEx meetings. The question here, I would imagine, is giving your chair or the person who you want to meet plenty of time in advance.
Yeah, and I'll jump in here as well. Sometimes what we do is we'll do maybe kind of informal meetings just to keep everybody in the loop on how your research is going and kind of the direction it's going. So maybe it's not necessarily I've given you a document and I would like some feedback in this respect, but it's more you're setting up a time with your committee just to check in individually and say, hey, this is where we are in the process. Give them a heads up on if they can identify issues that might be coming down the road. A lot of times it's good when you're doing, say, a comprehensive exam or leading into your defense to kind of get an idea of maybe some of those questions, roadblock type things. Some people might give you a heads up and say, hey, I'm going to ask you about this, so be ready. So I don't think it's maybe out of the ordinary to do some of those informal type of meetings with your committee. Of course, I would get the blessing of your chair before reaching out, just so that everybody is in the loop. And I often will tell my students, hey, why don't you reach out to them? So I'll just add that as well.
Thank you. So can the Writing Center help me understand feedback I receive that might be confusing or conflicting to me? Or is this something that's more appropriate to go to my chair for?
I would say, if you're getting the feedback from your chair and you're not sure what the feedback is, yeah, go to them and ask them, all right, what does this mean? I would say ask your chair probably first so that they can explain it. Sometimes, I'll write things that are kind of a shorthand that I understand and I think my students do, but looking back on it, maybe it wasn't as clear. So yeah, from my perspective, if I've given feedback and they don't know what it means, it's always good to come and ask.
Yeah, so the Writing Center, from my understanding or my time as a student there, they will actually tell you or ask you to go and bring this up with your chair, right? I mean, especially if the feedback in question is theoretical, conceptual, methodological, right? Remember, the Writing Center, they're probably not experts in your field, right? So if you're talking about the socio-psychological model of voting behavior, they're probably not going to understand the different indicators that predict one's vote and why is one indicator exogenous versus the other one is endogenous, right? In fact, the Writing Center is mainly there for stylistic and grammatical issues in your writing. So I would definitely avoid talking about theoretical, methodological, or empirical issues with the Writing Center.
Thank you. So what are your expectations for mentees when it comes to feedback that you have provided, and how do you handle when these expectations are not being met from that student?
And the mentees assuming the relationship between you and the mentor, correct?
Right, so the advisor and the student, or the committee member and the student.
I think this goes back to the question earlier of whether, how do you remove someone from the committee, right? And if you feel like the expectations are not being met, that they're simply there just to, I guess, take space in your committee. This will be, again, a conversation with your chair. But then again, in the beginning of this process, you're specifically dealing with the chair. right? In my case, sometimes I set out to talk to other readers about specific parts of my dissertation that they could help me in because they had some expertise in a related field. But I, I mean, most of your mentor-mentee relationship is between you and the chair. So if the chair is not providing feedback, that's a different story, right? If there's some expectations that you have, your expectations are not being met by your chair, that becomes a whole different sort of ball game. And how do you then switch your chairs? And there's a process for that. And I mean, I would just leave it at that.
Thank you. And Dr. Navalda, maybe you can speak a bit on if the students aren't meeting your expectations when you're providing them with feedback as well.
Yeah, for sure. So I was, sorry, I've got band class going on, so enjoy the saxophone in the background. So I think there are different kinds of feedback. There's feedback that I expect to be addressed, and then there's also feedback that is more maybe I throw out there for a student to think about, and then they can make a decision whether to incorporate it or not. So it kind of depends on the type of feedback that I'm giving. And I'll try to be clear with them and say, okay, so these are things that you have to address that either I want to see or somebody on your committee wants to see before we move forward, or if it's something to really kind of consider, and if it's more stylistic or kind of wording choices, things like that, then I'll try to be clear with them, and I'll say, you could think about making these changes, because at the end of the day, especially for doctoral students, I want the writing to reflect them and their work, right? Not so much my personal wording preferences. So I think it depends on the type of feedback that I'm giving.
Thank you. So some students do not completely understand the role of the graduate college committee member and the role that they play. How should a student fully embed the outside committee member in their committee and the overall process?
Yeah, so the graduate college representative can do a couple of different things. I think at the very basic level, the grad college rep is there to kind of protect the process. So they are the ones that are making sure that everything your committee is asking you to do along the line is kind of in, well, it's the way that the graduate college wants it done. So they don't necessarily need to be content area experts or anything like that. They are really representing the process from the graduate college standpoint. And so, in some cases, we've had grad college reps that do know a fair amount about the area, and they can really contribute to the document and to the study design and things like that. And then in other cases, they're from an area that is totally outside, and that's fine as well. It depends on, and this is something that we'll talk with your advisor about as far as the makeup of the committee. But it kind of depends on why you have asked them onto the committee.
Thank you. So our next question here in the chat is, if any, what are some challenges you personally had regarding your committee members and chair as a student? If none, what successful strategies did you experience?
So I guess to relate to the previous question, one of the challenges I had was during the defense with the outside member of my committee. To echo Dr. Navalta's point that, the committee member should be representative of the graduate college, meaning, make sure everything's fine and, in accordance to how it should be. Unfortunately, I elected to. I don't want to say unfortunate. I mean, the process ended up being more challenging. But I elected to have an outside member that was also a specialist in the field that I was working on, but from a sociological lens. And the reason that became a challenge is during the defense, there were some conceptualization issues that are interpreted differently in the sociological discipline versus the political science discipline, right? So just keep that in mind. If you're doing an interdisciplinary dissertation, which most of them are, just make sure that you cross your T's, you dot the I's with the outside member, because in their discipline, they may conceptualize things differently. And by, for example, I'll use my example. The post-Soviet space where I did my field research on is conceptualized differently in political science than it is in sociology, specifically with regard to the Baltic states. And there was some misunderstanding of why I didn't look at the Baltic states from the sociological point of view. So just, to wrap it up, make sure that if you elect to have an interdisciplinary dissertation and you bring in somebody from another discipline, make sure you have that differences down before you defend the thesis or the dissertation.
And I'll jump in here. And so thinking back, and it's been a little bit, but I was thinking about my doctoral committee, and maybe just a word of advice is that you want to check with your committee as far as availability. If you are not giving your defense or comprehensive exam or whatever you need to do in front of a full committee during a regular semester, then just double check with them as far as availability. There was a committee member that I had that one of his students, he allowed them to do their defense over the summer. So I just assumed that he would be fine to also be available for my defense over the summer. And when I went and asked him, okay, can we schedule a time? He was like, oh, I don't work over the summer, which was a surprise to me because I knew that his student gave her defense. So in my case, I had to delay my defense, and I had to come back during I started my first job and had to go back for my defense during the fall semester. So don't assume anything, I guess. It would be a good mantra.
Thank you. So our next question here in the chat is, would you recommend choosing a GC rep that you're on good personal terms with, or someone that is very knowledgeable in your subject, or maybe someone who is completely neutral of everything?
That's a tough one. If you want to, I guess if you want to finish sooner, it's maybe neutral of everything. But I don't know. My personality is I want feedback, and if it means having a 3-hour dissertation defense, then let it be so. But I guess the path least taken, I guess, would be mine. But the preferred path would be, just somebody that can pass you through the finish line.
And I would say, ideally, somebody that checks all 3 of the boxes, right? Somebody that you're on good terms with, somebody that can remain neutral with regard to your work, and somebody that can give you some good feedback. I don't know if that unicorn exists, but
Thank you both. So maybe this next question kind of directly relates to Rafi. You mentioned that you had somebody outside UNLV on your committee. So if your department lacks an expert in your dissertation topic, do you recommend bringing that outside member? I know you said you had some challenges, but was it overall beneficial?
So when I was a graduate student, I was full bent on going into academia and teaching. And the field that I was sort of gaining expertise in was very sort of narrow and a sort of a nice network of people that know each other very well um, in voting behavior. And unfortunately, we did not have a voting behavior, specifically an economic voting behavior specialist in our department. So I knew I needed somebody to sign off on my dissertation that had, I guess, that name so they can sign off on my work so my work can be competitive. That's the way I approached it, right? Sort of, I guess this is my own bias. Um, you do not need to have somebody in your as sort of a co-chair or even in your committee that is outside of UNLV. It's really about how you approach things. It's really how comfortable your chair is. It's really the kind of relationships you have with this person outside, because you also have to approach this person, right? And another thing you have to take into consideration, there's a process. They have to gain what I think it's called graduate faculty status. So they have to apply to UNLV, and by apply, they fill out an application, provide a CV, and they're actually sort of accepted to be on your committee. So it does take several hours of time commitment from them on the procedural end of it, right? So just take that into consideration. But I mean, I would recommend it if you want to go into academia and you need somebody that is sort of an expert, a known name to sign off on that dissertation.
Thank you. So what are some suggestions that you have for navigating conflicting feedback between your advisor and committee members?
Yeah, that is a really good question. Um, I would use your advisor as your ally, um, and to some extent, let your advisor fight the battle for you, um, or at least be able to share the perspective of why this should or should not be done. I think you get into some problems as a student if you're going to a faculty member and saying, "Oh, I can't do this," or so. Yeah, if it's conflicting, I think there should be some good justification either way to say this is why I'm doing this or this is why I'm not doing it. But then also to have the backing of your advisor, I think is key.
I would echo Dr. Navalta's position of going with your advisor. And I would simply add that if there's any conflict between the committee members and the advisor, the number one thing you need to be concerned about is that needs to be addressed before you defend. I was witness to, I think, one defense where there was an oral conflict during the defense of them disagreeing on a certain point, and I guess sort of the defense went south, and then it has to come back to the students. So make sure all the issues of conflict are addressed right before the defense.
Thank you both. I think we mentioned earlier that you had Raphael, you had a co-chair, but can you both touch a bit on the pros and cons to having co-chairs? Does one outweigh the other?
I guess the con right off the bat is the increased veto player, right? You have another person that's going to potentially not sign off or might sway the dissertation one way or another. I think the most important thing you can do is when you have a co-chair is sit down with the three of you and sort of discuss this division of labor. And I guess one good thing that happened in my case was one of my co-chairs said, if there's issues of disagreement, go with the other co-chair. I will sort of, discount my position and go. This was right off the bat, this was made clear. So in the numerous instances where co-chair A said, ABC and co-chair B said XYZ, I brought it to co-chair A's attention of co-chair B's differing position. And co-chair A said, yeah, go with the co-chair B's position. So, I would just say that set out everything in agreement, right, early on.
And I'm not sure I've ever had a true experience where we've had co-chairs that have had kind of an equal division of labor. The only experiences that I've had is on committees where I might be a co-chair in name, but one person or the other is doing all the heavy lifting. So I'm not sure that I would really say that that's the way that co-chairs are supposed to work. So it almost is kind of by de facto where one person actually is your chair. The other person, even though they might have the title of co-chair, is kind of a regular committee member.
Thank you. So our next question is, I appreciate all the feedback I receive that helps me improve my studies, but what happens when it starts to change the focus of my study?
I'll jump in here. You know, I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. I think part of the reason why you do your graduate degree and part of the reason why it's 3 or 4 years for those of you that are doctoral students is that it gives you yourself time to process kind of the earlier findings. And I guess I'm speaking more about the way that we do things in our department. We have a multi-part dissertation, you know, so I think a lot of times students come in thinking, okay, I'm going to do 1, 2, and 3, and this is going to be it. And I like to see where it's more of a journey where you take those findings, the first part 1, and it leads you to what you're going to do in part 2, and then part 3. So it's I'm fine with it going in different directions. You know, I have a student right now that came in and like, I'm going to be a caffeine researcher. Well, actually, none of his 3 dissertation parts have even touched on caffeine. He is now studying exercise in nature, and it's been an interesting path and one that he has been fully on board with. But if he was of the mindset of, oh, these are going to be the 3 things that I do, it wouldn't have allowed him the growth that he's had.
And just to note, because in the political science discipline, it's based on my experience, it's very rare that what starts out as a prospectus defense is the exact same thing what ends up being the dissertation defense, right? Along that journey, there's going to be a lot of routes being taken, new knowledge accumulated, new sub-research questions, new ideas that need to be flushed out. So unless the focus of your study is entirely different, that's a good thing. But in the event, let's say that the focus of your study is going one way or another, or in one way, and you clearly do not want it, I would talk to your advisor. I mean, you know, the dissertation committee is an experience. You know, maybe you'll get a reader that is very assertive in what they want you to do, and may take the role, I guess, more serious and with more assertiveness. And if they are orienting you outside of your scope, you know, it is up to you to discuss this with your advisor.
Thank you. So I don't see any questions right now in the chat, so I'm just going to give everyone 1 minute to think about questions, or if there's anything we did not go over today that you would like to ask our panelists.
I do have a thought while you're thinking about your question, kind of on the last topic that we had. I have been in meetings before, like prospectus meetings, where it has started to go down the path where things might be added on, and where the committee has then taken a step back and said, you know, what we're asking the student to do is way beyond the scope of what they should be. You know, whether it's for a master's, you know, thesis, or even for a doctoral dissertation. where we have realized, okay, yeah, we shouldn't be asking the student to do this. So, you know, I think in that sense, it's good to have a committee that is reflective and understands, okay, this is what can feasibly be done. So let's ask you to do it.
So we do have a question in the chat. Any advice on not being nervous during your defense, especially because it's online now?
I think online makes it easier because you're at the comfort of your own home, in your chair, in a desk somewhere, right? Or physically away. So I guess if you're nervous, just put that monitor up just a little bit so they don't see like full headshot of you. But I mean, yeah, I guess nervousness goes with it, especially if you're in that physical environment. But I think online, I would interpret it as being more suitable for individuals that have anxiety during the defense, and I was one of those, right? I mean, for my defense, everything that went wrong just went wrong. The computer wouldn't start. One of my professors was calling from Ireland. Phone hanged up. I mean, it was just, yeah. And then you're becoming all shaky because you're making it's a couple of minutes past your time and you're trying to get everything in order. So I think online, and I also think your committee would be more respectful to the fact that we're sort of in this remote setting and we're at the mercy of technology.
So I have two thoughts on that. The first one is practice, practice, practice. So I wouldn't have the first time where I'm actually giving my dissertation defense in front of a committee. I would run through it. And what I like to do with my kind of laboratory group is to have a time where we get together and just with our group, whoever is defending has a chance to do it in front of our small group, people that people that you have worked with, so that you can get feedback from people that respect, that have your best interest at heart. The other thing that I would suggest is going in with the mindset that you are now kind of the expert in that area, right? You've spent the last 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, however long it is, doing a deep dive into this information. So of anybody that knows this area, you are the one that knows it the best. So if you go in with that mindset that, hey, I am showing that I am the expert in this area, then I think that can help set you at ease as well.
Thank you both. So we have another question in the chat. Do you have any recommendations on how to identify potential conflicts between the committee members in my research before the defense, considering some committee members only get to know the details of my research during the defense?
I would say one way you can identify is if they come from different theoretical camps that based on the scholarship, they might not see the same thing eye to eye. So if you have different committee members that are in different theoretical camps, that's going to be a potential conflict if you choose one or the other, because the other would say, well, why aren't you using this route? So I guess prospectively, you would gain a better understanding of the scholarly background of your committee members and to see if there's any potential areas of conflict that may exist.
And I think I made this suggestion before, but just kind of informally checking in with your committee beforehand, I don't think it's a bad thing or out of the ordinary to do. And that might be a place where you can catch some of those potential conflicts, that might arise hopefully your committee members have read your document and have kind of prepared. So it might be good to double check with them that that has occurred also, just in case there are any questions that you can address perhaps beforehand, or for them to give you a heads up and say, hey, I'm going to ask you about this during your defense.
Thank you. So it looks like we do not have any other questions. So we will wrap it up for today. But before we do, I just want to extend a huge thank you to both of you. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us and providing us with valuable advice. I hope everybody has a great rest of their afternoon.
Thank you. Take care.